Lieutenant General Alexandria Lex Carter never liked the spotlight. She was a warrior of quiet storms, precise, deliberate, disciplined. After 30 years in the Army, she had survived war zones, diplomatic crises, and the political minefields of the Pentagon. But nothing had prepared her for what would happen in the parking lot of Reagan National Airport on a rainy Thursday night. She had just returned from Liberia, where she had overseen a joint medical mission with local governments. It was a 16-hour flight back, and she was bone-tired. No fanfare, no military escort, just a regular black hoodie, dark joggers, and a worn-out duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Her Jeep Wrangler, custom matte black with military-grade mods, was parked at the edge of the long-term parking. She walked with purpose, her boots echoing on the wet asphalt. The distant thunder grumbled like an old veteran remembering war. Lex pressed her key fob, and the Jeep chirped in response. That's when she saw the lights. Red and blue, bouncing across the rain-speckled windows. A patrol cruiser, 2 officers stepping out, eyes already narrowed, hands already twitching. She didn't flinch. Not yet. Evening, she said calmly. Step away from the vehicle. One of them barked. She paused, her instincts humming. Is there a problem, officer? Hands where we can see them. Now. And just like that, the comm shattered. The metal of the handcuffs was colder than the rain. Lieutenant General Alexandria Carter had been restrained before in training drills, simulations, survival tests, but never like this. Never on American soil. Never by men who were supposed to serve her. They didn't ask for ID. They didn't question her calmly. They saw her skin, her hoodie, her presence next to an expensive, modified Jeep, and decided she was a suspect. The taller cop shoved her against the vehicle, her cheek pressing against the cold metal of the Jeep's door. Don't move, he growled. I'm not resisting, she said, her voice steady. Smart, the other muttered, snapping the cuffs tighter than necessary. Her wrists burned, her pride burned hotter. One of them began searching her duffel. No warrant, no permission, just dirty hands rifling through her uniforms, medals, and confidential folders from the mission in Liberia. He paused when he found the Pentagon badge. He stared at it, puzzled, then dropped it like it was contaminated. What's this? He asked with mock confusion. Is this real? Lex didn't answer. She was focused on her breathing. In, out, stay calm, stay alive. I asked you a question. Still no answer. Her silence wasn't defiance. It was discipline. The crowd across the lot was growing. A woman had pulled out her phone and was recording. A teenage boy whispered to his dad, "Is she a soldier?" Another man shouted, "That lady's got military tags. Man, you sure this is legal?" The cops ignored them. Stolen vehicle report came in. The shorter officer said, as if that explained everything. My name, she said finally, is Lieutenant General Alexandria Carter, United States Army. This vehicle is mine. Registration in the glove box. Military ID in my back pocket. And you just committed a felony. They laughed. A general? Lady, you must be real good at lying. I don't lie, she said softly. I give orders. A pause. Then the taller one leaned in close, his breath thick with disdain. You're not giving orders tonight. That was the moment the cold turned to fury. But Lex didn't lash out. She didn't scream or argue. She raised her wrist, slowly, deliberately. Her military smartwatch was still active, untouched by their search. With a single tap, a secured Pentagon channel opened. A voice answered instantly. General Carter? She exhaled. Yes, I've been detained. Let's take a short pause. If you're listening to our story, tell us in the comments where you're tuning in from. Have you ever experienced or witnessed something similar in your own life? We'd love to hear your voice. And if this story speaks to you, consider subscribing to stay with us through every chapter. Now, we continue. The first sound wasn't sirens, it was engines. Low, steady, and controlled, like a lion's breath before it roars. The 2 officers didn't notice at first. They were too busy standing guard over a woman they still believed was lying. A woman whose wrists bore the bruises of their arrogance. But Alexandria noticed. She always noticed things others missed. Her eyes shifted slightly, watching the shadows move beyond the rows of parked cars. It wasn't fear in her face, it was calculation, timing, strategy. 3 black SUVs turned the corner of the lot in tight formation. No screeching, no drama, just quiet precision. The kind of entrance that said, "This is not a rescue, this is a correction." The taller cop reached for his radio. Too late. Doors opened in unison. 6 men and women stepped out, all in dress uniforms. The rain didn't touch them. They moved with purpose, hats low, shoes shining even in the wet gravel. And at the center, a colonel. He walked like someone who had given orders in war and watched men die obeying them. His eyes landed on Lex, then on the cuffs, then on the 2 officers. His voice was calm, cold. "Uncuff her, now." The officers hesitated, just a flicker, but the moment passed and they scrambled. We were just following. I wasn't speaking to you," the colonel interrupted, not even looking at them. Lex said nothing. She stood still as the cuffs came off, the blood returning painfully to her fingers. She didn't rub her wrists, didn't wince. She simply stared at the 2 officers. The shorter one looked pale now, the taller one defiant, but cracking. "You made contact with the Pentagon?" the colonel asked. Lex nodded once. "And did these officers inform you of your rights?" She shook her head slowly. "No ID check, no warrant. They rifled through classified documents." The colonel's jaw clenched. One of the uniformed men whispered into a secure radio. "Backups en route," he said. "Civil rights attorneys, JAG, MP detachment." The taller officer finally snapped, stepping forward. "This is insane. How the hell were we supposed to know who she was? She looked like what?" Lex asked quietly. He froze. All the rain in the world couldn't wash away the silence that followed. "You thought I stole my own car?" she continued, voice low. "Dangerous. You didn't see a person. You saw a profile." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. "I served this country for 30 years, Lex said. "I've had sand in my boots from 5 continents. I've pulled soldiers out of burning trucks, sat with dying boys so their mothers wouldn't be alone. And you too, looked at me and saw a criminal." The colonel took a step closer. "Lieutenant General Carter is the 3rd highest ranking woman in the U.S. Army," he said coldly. "Tonight, you didn't just detain a citizen. You detained your superior officer. You didn't just violate her rights. You violated the oath you swore to uphold." The shorter cop tried to speak again, but the words never came. Lights flashed again, this time, blue and gold. Military police, legal reps. The crowd that had formed earlier was now watching in stunned silence. Phones were still recording. History was still being written. And Lex simply stood there, in the rain, her face unreadable, because she knew. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The interrogation room was too clean, too quiet. The fluorescent lights buzzed like judgment. No windows, just 4 walls that had seen too many confessions, too many breakdowns, and too few apologies. Lieutenant General Alexandria Carter sat at the center of it, calm but unreadable. Her uniform was now dry, pressed, her rank displayed in sharp, gleaming brass. Her hands, though bruised, were folded neatly on the table. Across from her sat a man in a suit, not a cop, not military, a Department of Justice investigator, middle-aged, white, nervous. He cleared his throat for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. We want to express, first and foremost, our regret, General Carter." Her eyes didn't blink. "We've begun internal reviews of the 2 officers. They've been placed on administrative leave pending." "Save it," she said quietly. He flinched. "You think this is about 2 bad apples?" "Ma'am, no. You don't get to ma'am me after 2 officers shoved my face into a car door and searched military files without a warrant." Silence. Then she leaned forward, just slightly. "Let me be clear, Agent Levins." Her voice dropped, steady, measured. "This wasn't just a mistake. It was a failure of pattern, policy, and prejudice. You want damage control. I want accountability." He swallowed hard. Outside the room, 2 military police officers stood guard. One of them glanced through the observation window, watching Lex. The other muttered, "She's not done." Inside, Agent Levins tried to pivot. "We have federal oversight protocols we can initiate, and with your cooperation, we may be able to accelerate disciplinary action." "The officers didn't know your identity. They didn't care about my identity," she interrupted. "That's the point. I could have been anyone. I was anyone to them. A black woman with a car they didn't think I should have. That was enough to assume guilt." He sighed. "There's going to be media coverage. Lots of it. I hope so. You understand the attention could affect my command?" She cut in. "Good. Let it. Maybe it's time we all get uncomfortable." He paused again, but this time, he didn't argue. Because the truth was heavier than politics. This wasn't just about Alexandria Carter anymore. This was about how many others never got a call answered, never had backup arrive, never had rank to shield them from humiliation and violence. Lex knew her case was unique, not because she was mistreated, but because she survived it with witnesses and power. Most didn't. She tapped her fingers on the table once. Where are the officers now? Confined to desk duty, under investigation. Internal Affairs is. No, she said, that won't be enough. General? I want federal civil rights charges. I want psychological evaluations. I want every complaint they've ever had reopened and audited. I want a systemic review of this department from the ground up. Agent Levin stared at her. This wasn't a victim asking for peace. This was a general preparing for war. He stood slowly. I'll escalate this to the Attorney General. Do that, she replied. Then she stood too. Not with anger, not even with pride, with purpose. And for the first time in the interview, Levins understood the truth. This wasn't the story of an abused officer. It was the story of a system waking up because someone with stars on her shoulders refused to stay silent. The video hit the internet at 9:04 a.m. By 9:11, it had over 300,000 views. By noon, it was on the front page of every major news outlet. No filters, no voiceovers, just raw footage, a black woman being thrown against her own car, handcuffed, silenced, while two officers dug through classified files as rain soaked her uniform. The title said it all. Lieutenant General Carter, detained while black. Cable news anchors stumbled over their words trying to explain how two beat cops had manhandled one of the highest-ranking women in the U.S. Army. Twitter was on fire. Veterans, soldiers, activists, mothers, college students, all weighing in, all asking the same question. If this can happen to her, what does it say about the rest of us? Outside the station, the first protest was small. 10 people, a few signs, one man with a bullhorn. But by the next morning, the street was flooded. Hundreds, then thousands. Some came in uniform, others in church robes, some in wheelchairs, some with burn scars from old wars, all of them chanting one name, General Carter, General Carter. It wasn't just solidarity, it was grief, rage, recognition. From the crowd, an older black woman stepped forward with trembling hands and a worn folder of documents. Her name was Viola Harris, and 32 years ago, she said, those same two cops broke her jaw and erased her complaint from the record. I was pregnant, she said into the microphone. They called me a liar, a whore, and told me my kind didn't belong in their town. She'd never seen justice, until now. Then came more voices. A retired sergeant who said one of the cops planted drugs on his teenage son. A teacher whose autistic brother had been beaten during a traffic stop. A former city clerk who had once tried to report misconduct but had been told to let it go. Every voice was a match to the gasoline. And still, Lex hadn't spoken to the press. She stayed silent, not from fear, but from discipline, from strategy. She knew, when the system breaks its silence, your words matter more. Inside a Pentagon press room, a spokesperson confirmed that an ongoing review was underway and that General Carter remained in active command. That made headlines. Because it meant one thing, she wasn't backing down. Meanwhile, the officers, Rodriguez and Taylor, were under round-the-clock security. Their home addresses had leaked. Their records, once sealed behind Union shields, were now exposed. The number of prior complaints, 17 and 23, most of them from black and Latino civilians. None of them had led to discipline. Until now. Lex sat in her home office, a wall of medals behind her, a tablet glowing on the desk. She watched the stream of voices, testimonies, news segments, tears. She didn't cry, not yet. Instead, she opened a folder. Inside, legal briefs, contact names, data points. At the top, she wrote 2 words, systemic pattern. This wasn't personal vengeance. It was war. And she had a plan. She didn't plan to speak that day. The organizers had begged her for a word, a gesture, even a wave from the window. But Alexandria Carter stayed inside the courthouse conference room, watching the crowd from behind the tinted glass. Her eyes scanned the streets below, overflowing with voices, signs, drums, flags. Justice for General Carter. Enough is enough. You protect a system that never protected us. And then, she saw the girl. No more than 16. Black. Ponytail swing. Holding a handwritten sign that read, "Maybe I'll survive too, if I earn a uniform." Lex closed her eyes. It wasn't ego. It was grief. The kind that settles into your lungs and makes it hard to breathe. She had spent a lifetime building armor, medals, credentials, discipline, control. And still, all it had taken was a moment of rain and ignorance to shatter it. But now the world had seen her stripped of rank, of silence, of invisibility. And instead of pitying her, they rallied. Not just for her, but because of her. She stepped away from the window. 5 minutes later, the doors opened, and the crowd fell into stunned silence. Lex stepped onto the makeshift stage. No podium. No script. No teleprompter. Only a microphone in her hand, and a fire she no longer intended to bury. She waited for the noise to die. Then she spoke. I wasn't going to say anything today. I thought silence might be stronger than anger. But silence hasn't protected us, not me, not you, not our sons and daughters, our brothers and sisters. The crowd leaned in, frozen. I didn't come here as a general today. I came as a citizen. As a black woman who has bled for a country that doesn't always bleed for me. Murmurs swelled. I have obeyed the law. I have upheld the law. I have defended this nation in war zones most of you will never see. And yet 2 officers decided that none of that mattered when they saw my skin. They didn't see rank. They didn't see honor. They saw a threat. A woman sobbed somewhere in the crowd. But this isn't just about me. It's about a system that trains men to fear women like me. That trains silence into the mouths of those who see injustice and look away. Well, I'm done looking away. I will not retreat. I will not apologize for surviving. I will not hand back the uniform that I earned because others are too blind to see it, and I will not let this moment pass without change. Her voice cracked, but her stance didn't. To every officer watching this who thinks their badge means invincibility, you are mistaken. The era of impunity is over. The crowd erupted. Cheers. Tears. Raised fists. Some stood on cars. Others dropped to their knees. But all eyes were on her, not as a victim, but as a storm. That night, the footage played across the globe. Headlines called her a force of nature. Congress members issued statements. One senator publicly offered to launch hearings. A presidential candidate called her the spine of justice we needed. And in the quiet aftermath, when the crowd thinned and the stage lights dimmed, Lex stood alone again. Tired. But unafraid. Because the silence had finally broken. And now, there was no going back. The phone calls began 2 days after the speech. At first, they came masked, no caller ID, brief pauses, then clicks. Silent pressure. Then came the names. Old ones. Powerful ones. Admirals. Senators. Ex-commanders with polite voices and heavy intentions. General Carter, you've made your point. We admire your bravery, but it's time to let the process play out. You don't want to politicize this, do you? That would damage your legacy. There are consequences for challenging the chain of command. Lex listened. She didn't answer. Then came the message with no return number, left on her encrypted voicemail at 3:14 a.m. You keep pulling this thread, and the whole fabric tears. Are you prepared to wear the blame for what comes next? Her hand hovered over the delete button. Then she pressed save instead. By morning, her inbox had doubled. Lawyers. Think tanks. Anonymous dossiers. Some supportive, others warning her to stop. One message, signed only with the letter J, had attached a 34-page document titled, Discrediting General Carter, Strategic Considerations. She opened it. It was a blueprint for character assassination. Bullet points. Talking heads to activate. Ex-lovers to find. Accusations to suggest without proof. Psychological diagnoses to hint at. It read like a war manual, and she was the battlefield. But none of it shocked her. What did shake her came later that day, when she met with an old mentor, Major General Harold Crane, now retired. They sat in the back of a quiet D.C. bistro. He ordered bourbon. She didn't touch hers. Lex, he said, eyes heavy, you're playing with forces that don't lose. So were you, she answered. Not like this. You embarrassed them. Publicly. You bared the teeth of the institution. And now, they want your head. Let them come. He shook his head slowly. You think you're still fighting soldiers. You're not. You're fighting accountants, lobbyists, generals in suits who write policy instead of orders. They don't care how brave you are. They care about disruption. You've become unpredictable. She looked him in the eye. If I am, it's because predictable never worked for people like me, he sighed. Then he passed her a small manila envelope across the table. Inside, surveillance photos. Her house. Her sister's job. Her niece's school. They're not just watching you anymore. Lex froze. Why are you showing me this? Because I trained you. And because I owe you the truth. He stood. You think the storm's already hit. But this is just the wind picking up. That night, Lex sat alone in her study, lights off, moonlight creeping through the blinds. She opened the manila envelope again and stared at the photos. She felt fury, yes. But deeper still, she felt something older. Something heavier. A memory she had buried. Her father, dragged out of his car when she was 9. Accused of stealing his own toolbox. She remembered the flashlights. The screams. The silence afterward. She had promised herself, that night, she would rise so high that no one could touch her. But power, she now saw, was never immunity. It was simply the first target. She stood, walked to her file cabinet, and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside, sealed folders, maps, reports, things she had collected over the years. Whispers of corruption. Dead ends. Names. She pulled them out one by one and laid them on the table. If they wanted war, they'd have it. But it would be on her terms. The first leak came from a familiar source. Lex sat in her office, scrolling through the latest round of emails. A list of her colleagues, once trusted allies, now carefully concealed names. A few of them had been supportive, sending her words of encouragement in private. But then there was a whisper, a leak, just the faintest trace of a document landing in the hands of a reporter. It wasn't enough to expose the depths of the conspiracy, but it was enough to plant the seeds of doubt. The whispers began. Was the general truly a hero, or a woman who had pushed too far? Was she fighting for justice, or for something else entirely? The press began to turn. General Carter's past, a question of loyalty, a hero or a political pawn. What does the Pentagon really think of the general? A reporter from the Times reached out for an interview. Lex wasn't surprised. She knew the game. But this was no longer a game of truth. It was a game of narrative, and she was no longer in control of her own story. One of her most trusted sources, a former colleague who had worked in the Pentagon for over a decade, called her late one evening. Lex, they're coming for you, but it's not just about you anymore. They're using you to control the message. There's a faction inside the Pentagon that's already writing your obituary. What do they want? She asked, her voice steady. It's not about you. It's about the message you sent. You called out the system, Lex, and that's dangerous. They can't afford to let you win. Her heart dropped. This wasn't just politics. It was war. What can I do? She asked. The voice on the other end hesitated. Then, you have two options. You can either retreat, back down, and let them move on, or you can force their hand. But if you do that, if you push this, they will destroy you. Not just politically, personally, your reputation, your life. She didn't flinch. I'm not backing down. The next morning, she walked into the office of Senator Thomas Richards, one of the men she had once admired. He had reached out to her, offering support in the aftermath of the scandal. But this time, things felt different. His office was empty, save for the cold hum of an old air conditioner. His desk, however, was cluttered with papers. A few of them were familiar, documents she had submitted years ago for various investigations. The same papers, now scattered around like evidence in a case that had long since been buried. He stood by the window, staring out over the Capitol. When she entered, he didn't turn immediately. I'm glad you came, he said softly, as if he hadn't really expected her to show. I didn't come to talk. I came to get answers. He turned to face her then, his expression unreadable. Lex, you have to understand. The Pentagon wants you gone, and the more you fight, the more dangerous it becomes. They've already started digging into your past. They've already got people looking at your family, your records. They will stop at nothing. She stepped closer, her voice low but firm. I didn't start this fight, but I'll finish it. His face softened for a moment, But then it hardened again. You're not the only one with skin in this game. We have to protect our people. Lex, I have to protect mine. Her blood ran cold. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. He was choosing the system over her, over the truth, over justice. So, you're just going to sit back and watch them tear me apart? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. That was her answer. Without another word, Lex turned on her heel and walked out. The storm was no longer just gathering on the horizon. It had already crossed into her territory. Lex didn't sleep that night. Not that she could. After everything that had happened, she'd seen the news, read the reports, heard the whispers, all of them pieces of a puzzle that now seemed to be closing in on her. By morning, the storm she had felt on the horizon was here. The Pentagon had officially launched an investigation. The press had turned on her completely, and in the background, the phone calls continued. Lex, you need to stop. You're going to ruin everything. Do you understand the implications of what you're doing? They'll destroy you, politically, personally. Her phone rang again. The number was blocked. General Carter, said a familiar voice. This is Major Sinclair. I think you need to hear this. Sinclair had been one of her few remaining allies within the Pentagon. He had been silent for days, and now he was reaching out. Her heart tightened. She hadn't expected him to call, especially not with the situation growing more dangerous by the minute. What is it? She asked, her voice steady, though her pulse quickened. It's about your family, he said quietly. They're involved now. Not just you. They've already started looking into your sister, your niece. It's escalating, and fast. If you want to protect them, I can't let them get involved in this. She interrupted, voice hardening. It's too late, Sinclair replied. This isn't just about you anymore. The game has changed. People in high places are making moves, and they don't care who they hurt. But there's something you can do. What? There was a long pause. Then, in a low voice, Sinclair spoke. You need to go public. Bring everything to the surface. Don't wait for them to bury it. Expose it all, the corruption, the lies. Let the world see what's really happening. Her breath caught in her throat. What are you talking about? You want me to destroy the whole system? You have no choice, he said. They've already decided what to do with you. But you can make them pay. You can make them sweat. If you expose this, if you make the truth undeniable, they'll have to answer for it. Lex was silent. Her mind raced. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into the unknown. She had already lost so much. Her reputation, her career, her allies, everything was on the line. But the stakes were higher now. It wasn't just her future anymore. It was her family's, too. And for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of a decision that could cost her everything. Finally, she spoke. I'll do it. I'll make them pay. By the time the sun set, Lex had already made the call. She gathered the evidence, the files, the reports, the photos, everything that had been quietly collected over the years. It was a bombshell, one she knew could bring down more than just a few corrupt officers. It was a full-scale exposure of the ugly underbelly of the military-industrial complex. But that was the point. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. This wasn't about her revenge or redemption. It was about showing the world how deep the rot went. The next day, Lex sat in a small, sterile room. The cameras trained on her. The interview would be broadcast live. She looked straight into the camera, and for the first time since this had all started, she spoke with absolute certainty. No fear, no hesitation. I've been silent for too long, she began. And now, I can't stay silent anymore. What I'm about to say, what you're about to hear, will shake the foundation of everything you believe about this country, about the military, about the system we all trust to protect us. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in. The truth is, the system isn't broken. It's working exactly the way it was designed to. The truth is, I was right, and they knew it. The cameras zoomed in, the room growing tense. She was no longer just a woman being persecuted. She was a woman who had decided to fight back, a woman who had nothing left to lose. I'm here to tell you, to expose the corruption that runs through the very core of this nation's military apparatus. You will see the names, the faces, the lies they've been hiding. You will see the truth, and there is no going back from this. The world had seen it. The truth had been laid bare. The media exploded. Social media lit up with fury, with confusion, with demands for accountability. Lex had given them the raw footage, the damning documents, and the testimonies of those who had been silenced. There was no going back now. The storm had broken, and the question was no longer if it would destroy her, it was how. By mid-morning, her phone was flooded with messages from old contacts, politicians, generals, people who had been on her side and those who had never believed in her cause. Some were congratulating her for exposing the truth, others were warning her to prepare for the fallout. But one message stood out. It was from Major Sinclair. "Lex, I don't know if you can trust anyone anymore. This is bigger than you think. They're coming after your family now. Be ready." Her blood ran cold. She had suspected they would go after her, but to target her family, that was crossing a line. She stared at the message for a long time, unsure of how to respond. Her fingers hovered over the screen as she weighed her options. Every instinct told her to run, to get her family out of harm's way, to disappear for good. But that wasn't who she was. She had started this battle, and she would finish it. Lex didn't back down. But she knew that now, more than ever, she would need to be careful. This was no longer just a fight against corrupt officials. This was a fight for her very survival. The next day, her worst fears began to take shape. A convoy of black SUVs pulled up outside her house. She could see them from the window, armed men in tactical gear, their faces obscured by dark glasses. Her heart pounded in her chest as she recognized the insignia on their uniforms. They were from the same agency that had tried to discredit her before, the same people who had been behind the smear campaign. They were here for her. But they didn't know Lex Carter. She moved quickly, grabbing her phone and sending a message to Sinclair, her fingers trembling as she typed. "They're here. I need backup." There was no time to waste. She knew what was coming. She had spent enough years in the military to understand the quiet efficiency of such operations. They wouldn't make a scene. They wouldn't give her time to fight back. But Lex wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of an easy victory. She grabbed the files, the ones that could bring down the entire operation. With a cold determination, she hid them in the secret compartment of her floorboard, just as she had done years ago with sensitive documents. It was the only place that was truly safe. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to stay calm. Minutes later, the door crashed open. 2 agents stormed in, weapons drawn. They didn't say a word as they moved toward her, their eyes cold and unforgiving. "General Carter," one of them said, his voice flat. "You're coming with us." Lex didn't move. She didn't show fear. She knew that this was the moment when everything would change. She was no longer the victim of their schemes. She was the one who had taken control. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. Her voice was steady, unwavering. For a moment, the agents hesitated, confusion flickering in their eyes. But they quickly regained their composure. One of them stepped forward, his hand reaching for the cuffs. But before he could get any closer, Lex made her move. She was faster than they expected. She grabbed the nearest weapon from the side table, a small pistol, and pointed it at the 2 men, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I said I'm not going anywhere," she repeated, her voice low but powerful. "And I don't think you want to test me." The agents froze, eyes wide with disbelief. For a split second, everything was still. Then, without another word, they backed off, their hands raised in surrender. But Lex wasn't done yet. She turned to the window, watching as the convoy began to pull away. The black SUVs were gone, but she knew that this was just the beginning. They would come back. They would come after her again, harder and faster. But Lex wasn't afraid anymore. She had crossed the line, and she wasn't turning back. The air was thick with tension. Lex had made her final decision, and there was no turning back now. The truth had been laid out for all to see, the government's corruption, the military's darkest secrets, the lies that had been told to the public for years. But what came after the truth? That was the question no one had an answer to. After the broadcast, after the documents were leaked, after the furious outcry from all sides, the storm that had been gathering for weeks had finally reached its peak. The investigation into the Pentagon had gone public, and every corrupt official involved had been exposed. But the fallout was massive, and Lex had become a lightning rod for it all. She had been called a traitor, a hero, a martyr. Some people praised her for taking down the system that had wronged her, while others condemned her for her recklessness. The truth didn't make everything better, it only made things more complicated. But there was no avoiding the consequences. As she sat in the small office she had been relegated to after her fall from grace, she could hear the murmurs in the hallway. The world outside was changing. And so was she. Her phone rang. A number she knew all too well. "Lex," said Major Sinclair's voice, low and grave. "It's done. They've been arrested. The ones who were behind it all. The ones who were trying to take you down. It's over." The weight of his words hit her like a sledgehammer. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting it sink in. The victory was real. But it came at a cost. "And what about me?" she asked, her voice strained. "What happens to me now?" "You've done your part," Sinclair replied. "You've changed everything. The world knows the truth, and now they have to deal with it. You've done what no one else had the courage to do." "But I've lost everything," she said bitterly. "My career, my reputation, my family. What was the point if I'm left with nothing?" Sinclair was silent for a moment. Then, he said, "The point, Lex, is that you've shown the world what happens when you stand up. The point is that you've made it impossible for them to keep lying. You've exposed the rot, and that's what matters." She nodded slowly, staring out the window at the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. Lex stood up and looked at herself in the mirror, taking a deep breath. Her reflection stared back at her, weary but resolute. She had fought, and she had won, but at what cost? She knew she had lost her place in the system, but that didn't mean she had lost herself. She had lost the uniform, the rank, the title. But the strength, the fire, the drive, those were still inside her. They always would be. The sound of footsteps echoed outside her door, and she knew it was time. She wasn't sure what awaited her out there, but she knew one thing for certain: it was her choice now. It was time to start over.